Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast, podcast number 315. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the evening of Friday, May 19th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. There was no podcast last week. No stuff. I guess you've known that for a week now, or at least 6 days. I'll tell you why. I had every intention of doing the podcast, but the day job and everyday living kind of got in the way. We've got a pool. I got the trophy wife a pool several years ago, and we've always had a guy come out and open it and close it for us. It didn't happen this year. He kept putting it off. He got busy. Other things happened. The pool turned green. He'd shock it, and then he didn't come back, and it turned green again, and he would shock it and not come back. And pretty soon we had a pool with about a foot of algae, some alive, some dead, in the bottom of a pool. It was a disastrous mess. So we made the decision to just bite the bullet and open the pool on our own instead of waiting for the guy who does it normally. So Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Saturday, much of the day Sunday, at least Sunday night, I would say, was spent working on the pool. And Sunday night was the last opportunity I had because I had a trip to North Carolina this week. So I took the day off of work on Friday, and I worked on the pool. The only time I didn't work on the pool was for Mother's Day. We did something with the trophy wife on Mother's Day with some of the kids, and we had a good time. But anybody who's had a pool, a built-in pool, knows that you need to open it early and close it early, because the later you open a pool, the more trouble you're going to have. And we opened it way too late this time. So it just took a ton of time, a ton of effort. And I'd say we're 99% of the way. We could be swimming in this thing right now. The chemicals aren't just right. We're not keeping chlorine. The chlorine's going away too quick. Okay. So we added the last of the chemicals. It should be good now. There's only one thing stopping us from swimming now. And that is on the evening of Friday, May the 19th. It's supposed to get down into the 50s tonight. Saturday night is supposed to be getting down to 50. It might be 49 degrees tomorrow night. Okay? This is the end of May. What's going on here? Not to worry. By Sunday, it's going to start getting warmer, and by Monday, Tuesday, we're in the 80s. By Wednesday, Thursday, we're in the 90s. Memorial Day weekend, it's summertime, it's swim time, it's time to have a good time, and it will be summertime in East Central Missouri. It happens every year, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but it happens every year nonetheless. So question number 2, why are you doing a podcast on Friday night instead of on Saturday? Well, similar reason to the reason I didn't do a podcast last weekend. I've got plans for the weekend. On Saturday, tomorrow, my trophy wife and I will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. So needless to say, I need to step up and do something really nice on Saturday. So we are. And so that's why there'll be no Saturday podcast, because beginning early Saturday morning and going into Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, we'll be doing anniversary stuff. So there you go. Friday night podcast. Here we are 4.5 minutes into the podcast. I haven't even told you what the topic is. The topic would have been more timely had we done it last weekend, but we didn't, so it's not. But it's a podcast, and you can listen anytime you want. And the topic is the Gordon Lightfoot you never knew. Gordon Lightfoot died earlier this month. What was he, 84 years old, I think. You can't say he was gone too soon, because 84 is a nice life, okay? But as I researched, because I was a big Gordon Lightfoot fan, and actually There were 3 or 4 of his songs that I liked a lot, but if you look at what he went through, what he was all about, and some of his, I'm just going to say the way he went about his music, I've got a new appreciation for his music. The way he started, the way he ended, the way he basically was touring up until about a month and a half till he died. Okay. And, but again, the topic of today's podcast, the Gordon Lightfoot, You Never Knew. Before we get into that, I did want to talk about one other thing besides besides why I didn't do a podcast. But this week I mentioned I was in North Carolina, and those of you who have been there know what I'm talking about. North Carolina it's a simply beautiful state. It is. It's the South, but it's not the humid, muggy, icky South. It's not Mississippi. Okay. It's not Alabama. It's not even South Carolina. I mean, I like South Carolina, nothing against it, but it's just different. It's a little higher in altitude. So it's a little cooler, maybe. It's greener. It's just the economy's good. It's just a cool place. I really enjoyed it. And this week the weather was marvelous. It was mild. We had low humidity there. It rained a little bit one day, but it was fantastic. And, had a good time, did a lot of business. There's a lot of good customers out in North Carolina for me. And, the car I rented, I want to talk a little bit about the car I rented, which was a bit of a disappointment, and something that happened to me at a restaurant. And this will probably be the 17th time you've heard a very similar story from other people. And as I tell the story, I guarantee you're going to shake your head saying, yep, the same thing happened to me. And I don't understand why it happens this way at restaurants. And it's just not restaurants. It's restaurants, it's stores, it's anywhere where you are to be given, in air quotes, service. Before we get to that, though, the Chrysler 300. Once upon a time when those cars first came out, I was a big fan. They were very cool cars. They were comfortable. They were kind of prestigious. They rode nice. I really liked that car. And they've been around for a long time now, the Chrysler 300. In fact, I don't think they've changed that thing for about 10 years. And it shows. Now, I'm not just saying, yeah, well, they should have changed the headlights. Yeah, they should have changed the fenders. Yeah, maybe they should have changed the lines on the roof. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the inside of the car, the way it works, the way it sounds, the way it operates. It's like not only has nobody redesigned that car in 10 years, but the tooling used to put it together hasn't been repaired or refined in 10 years. Every door I opened in that car, whether it was the passenger door or the driver's door, you'd open the door. It's like there was a spring attached. It would close on you again. Every time. It didn't matter. I mean, this was not a case where I was on a hill, because one time I couldn't get out. I would open the car door, go reach for my phone. The door would close on my leg. Then I had to get out and sit in the passenger seat, and it did the same thing. So it's not that I was sitting on a hill. It's just that the doors, they didn't open easy, and they would close when you didn't want them to close. What else on that car? The engine, when you started it, it just sounded clunky, like the starter wasn't right. And I think it was just that it was noisier. The car engine made too much noise. The shifting of the car was not smooth. The electronics on the inside, the navigation, it would come through your phone where Siri would give you directions, but then right after Siri was finished, it would go on to the radio for just a fraction of a second. You'd hear like a half a second of the radio station. It wasn't a smooth interface, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know what these cars cost, but there's no such thing as a cheap car. The cheapest Econobox piece of garbage, what is it? The Mitsubishi Mirage, I think it is, which really doesn't even classify as a car to me. It's more like a go-kart. It's $17,000. Okay, so I don't know what the Chrysler 300 costs, but all cars are very expensive. And to have something work like this, I assume they still sell them, because if they weren't selling them, they wouldn't build them, okay? I assume they have a good profit margin on them, because like I said, they haven't redesigned anything on that car in 10 years. And maybe there's people that like that. Maybe there's people who, you know what, I'll go with the dopey, clunky interface and the motor that sounds too loud and the shifting that's not great and the doors that don't stay open. Maybe I'll go with all that if I can get, I don't know, maybe a $40,000 looking car for a $30,000 price or something like that. I don't know. But was not a fan of the Chrysler 300. I was once upon a time, but either I've changed, the car's changed, or maybe, just maybe, we've both changed just a little bit. Now, the story I wanted to tell, that I know you've heard this a lot, you've probably have it happen to you a lot, maybe in a restaurant, maybe in a store, maybe in any place where you get service, okay? This was Wednesday? No, this was Thursday, late afternoon. I was in the Raleigh-Durham airport. My flight was in an hour. It's time to get something to eat. So looked around. There wasn't anything much I really wanted, but there was this kind of a Mexican restaurant, kind of like a Qdoba or a Moe's, one of those places where you go and, okay, do you want a bowl? Do you want a burrito? Do you want a taco? Do you want a salad? And then you say, I'll take some chicken with it. And you kind of build your own salad or bowl or burrito or whatever you have. You build your own, okay? So you pay one price, then you go down the list and you tell the person building the meal what you want. And as is the case in most restaurants, it was staffed by younger people. And they was just playtime. They really didn't want to be there. They just wanted to just talk amongst themselves and play. And I couldn't tell if they were talking to me or if they were talking to their friend, because they never looked at me. They only looked at their friend, but they were talking to me. So finally I had to ask, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you repeat that? So she stopped and looked at me. She said, I'm asking you, do you want pinto beans or black beans? I said, oh, okay. I'll have pinto. And again, by the time I said, oh, okay, I'll have pinto, she stopped looking at me and started talking to her friend again. And she said, what? I said, pinto. She said, what? And in a little louder than normal voice, I said, I will have pinto beans, please. She stopped, looked at me and said, oh, okay. And put black beans on my meal. I didn't even say anything. And I thought to myself, you had to ask me twice. I had to ask you 3 times, or maybe vice versa. And you got it wrong. It was pinto or black, one of the two. There was a 50-50 chance that if you just picked up a spoon, you were going to get it right, and you got it wrong. After 3 times you asking me, and 2 times me asking you what the beans were, you still got it wrong. Now, I'm not trying to play some pompous ass that says, I demand this and that of my food, blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not saying that at all. And I know folks in food service don't get paid a ton of dough. I get that too. But you're building a salad. There's a finite group of things here. Your job is to ask the person what they want and give it to them. It's not rocket science. If you don't want to be there, get another job. Do something else. If you don't like your job, I get it. If you don't like your pay, I get it. But this is not the first time this has happened to me. This isn't even the 10th time this has happened to me. This happens to me about once a week, where the person behind the counter is just going through the motions almost. And it just causes me to scratch my head. Now, the one thing that did not make me angry, that I think I would have just lost my mind had this happened. At the end of the transaction, at least they didn't ask for a tip. If they had been sorely disappointed. Anyway, that's how my week was. It was actually a good week, so I guess I shouldn't complain. Nice week, good week, back home, and doing the podcast on a beautiful Friday evening in East Central Missouri. One more thing before we get on to the Gordon Lightfoot that you never knew. Green energy. It's here to stay. It's progressing. I'm not even going to say rapidly, but I would say it's slowly but surely growing. We're phasing out fossil fuels. We're phasing in renewable energy. And by the way, I think this is a good thing. I'm not one that says we need to build more coal-fired power plants. No, we don't, because they pollute the air. They're not good. Green energy is good. But what we need to take into consideration is, what do other people think about green energy? What do other people think about any energy? And the green crowd is always saying, and rightfully so, well, we have to share this planet with others, so we need to take others into consideration and stop with these fossil fuels, especially coal, and go to something more green and renewable, because we're all in this together. And by the way, I agree with that too. Now, herein lies the rub. Dateline, Lawrence, Kansas. I do business in Lawrence, Kansas, so I'm familiar with the area. It's about what you think. It's not the flat plains of Kansas, not quite. After you get a little bit west of Lawrence, you get that. But Lawrence, Kansas, it's a college town. It's not hillbilly haven, okay? It's not a bunch of inbred people from West Virginia that live there. But a lot of people that live there have lived on family farms for generations. And one of the things that they enjoy, according to this article, is sitting on their front porch, looking out over the horizon and seeing wheat fields, sunflower fields, cow pasture, et cetera. Just seeing God's creation out there and watching the sunset over a hill maybe, and just enjoying nature. Here's what they don't want: windmills destroying the view. And more people in the state of Kansas, in the Lawrence area, where windmills are a popular thing. It's a NIMBY thing. They don't want it in their backyard. There's case after case after case in this story of families who have been on farms since the mid-1800s, okay? And people are coming in, they're saying, okay, we will pay you so much money if you let us put windmills up on your property. And they say, no, thank you. Then they come back and offer them more money. They say, no, thank you. Now they're trying to get injunctions against these people, forcing them to let them put windmills on their property. These people don't want windmills on their property. And there's a movement in this country to force these people to let the energy companies put windmills on their property. They're unsightly. They're loud. The swish, swish, swish of the blades bothers them. The lights, because they're tall, they have to have beacons on them so airplanes don't hit them. It ruins the night sky. You've got these blinking red lights all over the place. They don't like it. And there's a lot in government who are not knowing what to do because they've got these mandates where they've got to go green. And in an area with lots of wind, like Kansas, windmills make sense. But not if the people that own the land don't want the windmills on their land. So it's an interesting conundrum. And I understand that we need to work towards green energy, but I also understand you can't take somebody in Kansas City and tell them, well, you know, there's 500,000 people in our city. Okay. So these 500,000 people trump the the half a thousand that live in this area. Well, you got to respect everybody's rights, especially if they own the land. This, my friends, is a problem that's not going to go away. Okay, topic of today's essay, the Gordon Lightfoot You Never Knew. As I mentioned earlier, Gordon Lightfoot, as I'm sure all of you know, he died earlier this year, but he was a Canadian singer-songwriter. Yeah, he was from Canada, who achieved international success in the folk and folk rock and some country music. He's credited with helping to define the folk pop sound in the 1960s and 70s, and has been referred to as Canada's greatest songwriter. And his songs have been recorded by some of the most renowned musical artists. In fact, Canadian chart success with his own records began as early as 1962, which is telling because this guy started to become popular when I was 3, okay? And he had a number 3 hit called Remember Me, I'm the One. It was a big hit in Canada and not so much here, okay? And it was followed by recognition and charting abroad in the 1970s. Lightfoot topped the U.S. charts with the hits If You Could Read My Mind in 1970, Sundown in 1974, Carefree Highway in 1974 also, Rainy Day People in 1975, and the song that everybody knows him for, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1976. Now, Lightfoot's albums have achieved gold and multi-platinum status internationally. His songs have been recorded by many notable artists like the Guess Who, the Band. In fact, Ronnie Robertson of the Band described Lightfoot as a national treasure. Bob Dylan called Lightfoot one of his favorite songwriters and said, quote, I can't think of any Gordon Lightfoot song that I don't like. Every time I hear a song of his, it's like I wish it would last forever. Coming from Bob Dylan, that's a big deal. Lightfoot was the featured musical performer at the opening ceremonies of the 1988 Winter Olympic Games in Calgary, Alberta. Born in Orillia, Ontario in 1938, Lightfoot's mother recognized his musical talents early on and schooled him to become a successful child performer. As a youth, he sang in the choir of Ortelia's St. Paul's United Church under the direction of choir master Ray Williams. Now, why is that important? Well, according to Lightfoot, Williams taught him how to sing with emotion and how to have confidence in his voice. Lightfoot was a boy soprano, and he appeared periodically on local Orillia radio, performed in local operettas, and in other events. At the age of 12, after winning a competition for boys whose voices had not yet changed, he made his first appearance in Massey Hall in Toronto, Ontario, a venue he would ultimately play over 170 times more throughout his career. Now, as a teenager, Lightfoot learned to play the piano all by himself, and he taught himself to play the drums. He held concerts at a resort area in Ortilia and sang for a couple of beers, as he said. Lightfoot performed extensively throughout high school and taught himself how to play folk guitar. A formative influence on his music at this time was 19th century master American songwriter Stephen Foster. Yeah, that Stephen Foster was a big influence of Gordon Lightfoot's. He was also an accomplished high school track and field competitor and set school records for the shot put and pole vault. And he was a starting nose tackle on his school's championship football team. He moved to LA in 1958 to study jazz composition and orchestra. To support himself while in California, Lightfoot sang on records and wrote, arranged, and produced musical jingles for commercials. He lived in LA for a while, but he missed Toronto. He missed Canada and went back there in 1960. And he really, for the rest of his life, basically lived in Canada almost exclusively for the rest of his life. Yeah, he'd spend time in the States and in Europe, mainly when he was touring and working, but he loved Canada, and he went back there after he just had enough of the States in 1960. So from 1960 till 2013, he basically lived in Canada the last 63 years of his life. Now, in 1962, Lightfoot released 2 singles, both recorded at RCA Studios in Nashville and produced by the famous Chet Atkins. And they were local hits on Toronto radio. That's the Remember Me on the One. That was number 3, as we mentioned before. And there were a couple other tunes that were hits, again, in Toronto. So apparently the Toronto radio is different from other radio, but they had big songs that made Lightfoot famous in the area. At first, he was more popular in the States as a songwriter. He wrote Early Morning Rain, which was recorded by the Mamas and the Papas, Peter, Paul, and Mary. He wrote other songs that were recorded by Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, Chad and Jeremy, the Johnny Man Singers, Marty Robbins, the Kingston Trio, Richie Havens, all recorded songs that Gordon Lightfoot wrote before he became super popular. Now, 1966 marked the release of his debut album, Lightfoot, which brought him greater exposure both as a singer and as a songwriter. In fact, the album featured many now famous songs, including For Loving Me, Early Morning Rain, Steel Rail Blues, and Ribbon of Darkness. Between 1966 and 1969, Lightfoot recorded 4 additional albums for United Artists and consistently placed singles in the Canadian Top 40. Now, Lightfoot signed a contract with Warner Brothers back in 1970 and scored a major hit in the United States with If You Could Read My Mind. That's the song that launched his international career. That song sold over 1 million copies by early 1971. The song originally appeared on the poorly selling 1970 album called Sit Down Stranger. Now, long after the song's success, the album was reissued under a new title. So in other words, they called Sit Down Young Stranger, If You Could Read My Mind, after the song. And it reached number 5 nationally and represented a major turning point for Lightfoot's career. That album also featured Sundown. That also featured a recorded version of Me and Bobby McGee. Over the next 7 years, he recorded a series of successful albums that established him as a singer-songwriter. Summer Side of Life in 1971, Don Quixote in 1972, also in 1972, Old Dan's Records, Sundown in 1974, which included the title track Sundown and Carefree Highway, Cold on the Shoulder in 75, Summertime Dream in 1976, which included the hit The Wreck of the Edmonds Fitzgerald, and Endless Wire in 1978. Now, during the 70s, Lightfoot's songs covered a long, wide range of subjects about various items. Sundown, from the album Sundown, went to number 1 on the American and Canadian charts. Now, this is something I didn't know. Sundown was the only number 1 hit in the United States. Not Carefree Highway and not The Wreck of the Edmonds Fitzgerald. Sundown was the only number 1 hit that Gordon Lightfoot had in the U.S. He performed twice on NBC's Midnight Special. He performed Carefree Highway, which was about Arizona State Highway 74, and it was followed up with a single on the same album. It charted both top number 10 in the United States and in Canada. Lightfoot wrote that song after traveling from Flagstaff, Arizona on Highway 17 to Phoenix, Arizona. Now, late November 1975, Lightfoot read a Newsweek magazine article about the loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, which sank on November 10th, 1975, on Lake Superior during a severe storm with the loss of all 29 crew members. The lyrics of his song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, released the following year, was substantially based on that article in Newsweek. It reached number 2 on the United States Billboard chart and was number 1 in Canada. Lightfoot appeared at several 25th anniversary memorial services of the sinking and stayed in personal contact with family members of the men who perished on the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 1978, Lightfoot had another hit on the U.S. Top 100, The circle is small. I can see it in your eyes. That reached number 33. And that was it for big hits for Gordon Lightfoot. By 78, he was kind of done. Now, in the 80s and 90s, he still recorded. He still toured. In fact, in 1980s and 90s, Lightfoot recorded 6 more original albums for Warner Brothers. They had, I would say, would you call it cult success? I mean, yeah, they sold, but they just sold to Gordon Lightfoot fans. Basically, his pop days were about done by then. In fact, in 1982, he released the single "Baby Step Back," and that actually marked the last time he charted in the U.S. But that was only went to 50. In April 1987, Lightfoot filed a lawsuit against composer Michael Masser, claiming that Masser's melody for the song "The Greatest Love of All," versions that were recorded by George Benson and Whitney Houston, both in 1977 and 1985, respectively, had stolen 24 bars from Lightfoot's 1971 hit "If You Could Read My Mind." Now, the transitional section that begins, "I decided a long time ago to," I lost my thought here. Sorry about that. The transitional section that begins, "I decided a long time ago to never walk in anyone's shadow," on Masser's song, "The Greatest Love of All," is the same melody as "I never thought I could feel this way, but I got to say that I just can't get it. I don't know where we went wrong, but the feeling's gone, and I just can't get it back," on Gordon Lightfoot's song, "If You Could Read My Mind." Now, I researched this. I read this, and I went back and looked at it. And all you got to Google is Gordon Lightfoot, Michael Masser. Just Google those two artists, okay? And you'll hear those songs. And I never thought in a million years that "The Greatest Love of All" and "If You Could Read My Mind" were at all the same. But those 24 bars, friends, they are identical. Michael Masser flat out stole them. Now, I've heard people say, well, yeah, Whitney Houston just stole that. No, Whitney Houston didn't steal anything. George Benson didn't steal anything. These people just wrote a song that was written. Michael Masser stole that song from Gordon Lightfoot. In fact, Lightfoot later said, look, I sued the guy because I didn't want people to think that I stole his song, okay? Because "The Greatest Love of All" was a huge hit. Not so much for George Benson in 77, but for Whitney Houston in 1985. And the crowd that heard that song in 1985 was not the same crowd that was listening to "If You Could Read My Mind" some 10 years earlier. Different crowd, different type of people. So I guess Michael Masser figured, different people, no one will ever know. Yeah, they knew. He admitted he was wrong. The case was settled out of court, and Masser issued a public apology. And again, if you ever get a chance, if you ever have a minute, go to the internet and Google Michael Masser, Masser, and Gordon Lightfoot. Just those two names. And bang, there's a website that comes up. There's more than one website comes up. Play the songs next to each other. It's amazingly the same, amazingly alike. 24 bars of stolen intellectual property. Now, during the 1990s, Lightfoot returned to his acoustic roots and recorded 2 albums. Throughout the decade, Lightfoot played about 50 concerts a year. In 1999, Rhino Records released the Gordon Lightfoot Songbook, a 4-CD box set of Lightfoot recordings of rare and unreleased tracks from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, plus a small hardbound book for fans that, well, they just like to see stuff about Gordon Lightfoot. Even in the 2000s, in January 2002, Lightfoot had written 30 songs for his next studio album. He recorded guitar and vocals of some of these new songs by himself, mixed them all together, and then he actually played a second concert in his hometown of Orillia, Ontario. In fact, he played many, many, many concerts for many, many, many years. In 2003, Lightfoot underwent follow-up surgery to continue a treatment of an abdominal condition that he had. But he was back to work in 2004. He completed album work on an album Harmony. And actually, that, to be fair, that was mainly recorded before he had gotten sick with that abdominal illness. In 2004, he made a surprise comeback performance, his first since falling ill, again in his hometown of Orillia. In August, he performed a 5-song set in Peterborough, Ontario, at a flood relief benefit. November that same year, he made his long-awaited return to the concert stage with 2 sold-out benefits in Hamilton, Ontario. Lightfoot returned to the music business with his new album selling pretty well in Canada, and he had appearances on Canadian Idol, which is like American Idol, except in Canada. In 2005, he made a low-key tour called Better Late Than Never Tour. 2006, while in the middle of a performance, Lightfoot suffered a stroke, and it left him temporarily without the use of his ring and middle fingers on his right hand. Well, he couldn't work for a while because he couldn't play the guitar. He started recovering after a fairly brief time, but full recovery did take longer. By 2007, Lightfoot had full use of his hand again, began playing all his guitar parts the way he originally wrote them. 2009, he went on a 26-city tour. And Lightfoot continued to tour much of the time. He played at Canada's 150th birthday celebration at Parliament Hill in July 2007. He was introduced by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He played his final concert. Get this. His final concert was played on October the 30th, 2002 in Winnipeg, Canada. And that is what? Let's see. October 30th, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Less than 7 months later, he was dead of natural causes. So Gordon Lightfoot went a long time playing up to 7 months to the time he died. And basically, they said he would have kept playing, but he ran out of gas. He was done. He couldn't do it anymore. And 7 months later, he was dead. I enjoyed researching this information about Gordon Lightfoot. And the big thing about him is he had phenomenal success in the 70s. But he kept on touring. He kept on writing. 50 albums is what he put out. I mean, the guy put out an incredible amount of music, even though he probably wasn't making much money on this music at all, at least at the end. All in all, I think I said 50 albums. He put out 20 albums over 54 years. So for 54 years, he recorded albums. Now, I made the statement that he didn't make a ton of money on the albums at the end, which is true. But when you when you work until you're 83 years old, okay, when you work from the time you're a teenager till you're 83, you amass a little bit of money. And anybody who's been to a live concert know they cost a bit of money to get into. Net worth upon death, $40 million. The biggest thing that held my respect for Gordon Lightfoot, though, was he didn't do what most artists do who aren't from America. They come to America. I mean, either because they don't like the taxes in England, they don't like the weather in Canada, they like the opportunity in the United States, they like the weather in California, you name it, they all come here. But Gordon Lightfoot did not. He was a Canadian. He loved Canada. He loved his country. And that's where he wanted to be. He lived much of his life in Orillia, Ontario, okay? Not a big town at all. But that's what he loved. That's where he wanted to be, and that's where he stayed. Gordon Lightfoot, rest in peace. Well, that's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. All one word, JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. Send me your email. I will send you a link to the podcast. You can download it and listen to it at your leisure. Well, that's it. We're done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.